The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy, pressing down on the chest of everyone in the room. The boy, just 17 years old, sat with his hands cuffed in front of him, his head slightly lowered. He had 5 felonies to his name. The judge had already made it clear. This was his last chance before being sent away for a long, long time. Then, the door creaked open. A man walked in, his presence like a sudden storm. His steps were slow, deliberate. His face was carved with deep lines, as if his past had been etched into his skin. Tattoos ran up his arms, disappearing under the sleeves of his jacket. The boy glanced up. His eyes met the man's, and something in those dark, hardened eyes made his breath hitch. "You think you're tough, kid," the man said, his voice a low growl. He took a step forward. "You think you're the baddest thing walking these streets?" The boy wanted to speak, wanted to tell this stranger to back off, but his throat had tightened. The man leaned in, close enough that the boy could smell the faint scent of cigarettes and something else, something metallic, like blood. "I was just like you," the man said, "and let me tell you something." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "I've seen what's waiting for you if you don't change. And trust me, it's worse than any prison." The boy swallowed hard. Then the man said something so terrifying, so bone-chilling, that the boy's fingers twitched around the edges of his chair. His whole body tensed, because in that moment, he knew everything was about to change. 1 week earlier, the streets smelled of rain and gasoline. In a small neighborhood on the rough side of the city, a car sped down an empty road, its tires screeching as it made a sharp turn. Inside, Jaden clenched his jaw, gripping the stolen gun in his lap. His heart pounded, but he refused to let it show. He was 17. He had 5 felonies already. And tonight? Tonight was just another job. "Stay sharp," Trey, the driver, said, his voice edged with excitement. "We get in, we get out. No mistakes." Jaden didn't respond. He had learned long ago that words didn't mean anything in this life. Only actions did. The car rolled to a stop in front of a small convenience store. The open sign flickered in the window, barely holding on. Jaden took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. The cold night air hit him like a slap, but he ignored it. He pulled his hoodie up, making sure his face was hidden, then pushed open the glass door. A soft bell rang. Behind the counter, an old man looked up, his wrinkled hands gripping the register. His eyes met Jaden's, and for a split second, something flickered in them. Not fear. Something else. "Kid," the old man said, his voice rough. "Don't do this." Jaden's fingers twitched around the gun. "Shut up," Trey snapped, stepping in behind him. "Open the register." The old man didn't move. His hands rested on the counter. "Please," he said, his voice softer now. "This isn't the way." Jaden's chest tightened. He had done this before. Robbed stores, broken into houses, threatened people. But something about this moment felt different. Trey grabbed a bottle from the nearest shelf and smashed it against the counter. Glass shattered. "Do it now," Trey shouted. The old man sighed. Slowly, he reached for the register. Jaden's heartbeat thudded against his ribs. Then, a siren. A flash of red and blue outside. Jaden froze. Trey cursed under his breath. "Move. We gotta go." Jaden turned to run. But before he could, the door burst open. Cops. Guns drawn. Hands where we can see them. Jaden didn't think. His body moved before his brain did. He lunged for the back exit, pushing through the shelves, knocking over boxes of cereal and candy. Trey was right behind him. Then, a gunshot. The sound cracked through the air like a whip. Jaden hit the ground. His breath caught in his throat. Pain. Burning. His shoulder. He clutched at it, but his vision blurred. Then, darkness. When Jaden opened his eyes, the world was white. Too bright. He squinted, trying to move, but his arms felt heavy. He was in a hospital bed. For a second, he thought he might be dead. But then he saw the officer sitting in the chair beside him. And just like that, reality crashed back in. He was caught. Again. Only this time, there would be no second chances. A knock on the door made him glance up. A tall man stood in the doorway, his arms crossed. His eyes, dark and unreadable, locked onto Jaden's. Something about him sent a chill down Jaden's spine. "You," the man said, his voice rough like gravel. "You're coming with me." Jaden frowned. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the room, and Jaden's gut told him this wasn't just another cop. This was something else. Something worse. Jaden's body tensed as the man stepped further into the hospital room. His presence was heavy, like a storm cloud before thunder struck. The officer sitting beside him straightened up, giving the man a nod. "You sure about this?" the officer asked. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept his eyes locked on Jaden, studying him. Finally, he spoke. "Yeah," he said. "I got this." The officer sighed, stood up, and walked out without another word. Now it was just Jaden and the man. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Jaden clenched his jaw. "I don't even know who you are." The man pulled up a chair and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His arms were covered in tattoos, old ink faded with time. "The name's Malik," he said. "And let me tell you something, kid. I've seen 100 versions of you." Jaden frowned. "I ain't no version of nobody," he shot back. Malik smirked. "That's what they all say." Jaden wanted to roll his eyes, but something about Malik's tone made him pause. It wasn't just some old guy trying to act tough. It was something deeper. "How long you been in this life?" Malik asked. Jaden narrowed his eyes. "Why do you care?" "Because I used to be you," Malik said, his voice low. "And I know exactly where you're heading." Jaden snorted. "Oh yeah? And where's that?" Malik's face darkened. His fingers tapped against his knee, slow and deliberate. "A grave," he said. "Or a cell so small you forget what fresh air smells like." A shiver ran down Jaden's spine, but he masked it with a smirk. "Man, I ain't scared of no prison," Malik laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. It was hollow, cold. "You think this is a game?" Malik's eyes locked onto Jaden's, sharp as a blade. "Let me tell you something, kid. When I was 17, just like you, I had 5 felonies under my belt. I thought I was untouchable. You know what happened next?" Jaden didn't answer. Malik leaned in. "I put a bullet in a man's chest over a stupid argument. You know where that got me?" Jaden swallowed hard but kept his face blank. 25 years, Malik said. "In a box. And let me tell you, after you're 10, you stop counting. After you're 15, you stop caring. After you're 20, you stop existing." The room felt smaller now. Jaden shifted in his bed. "That ain't me," he muttered. Malik shook his head. "That's what I thought too." He sat back, crossing his arms. "You got 2 choices, kid. Keep running down the same road, thinking you're the baddest thing out here. Or listen to someone who already walked it and barely made it out alive." Jaden didn't know what to say. A knock at the door saved him from answering. A nurse poked her head in. "Jaden, you're being released in an hour. Your hearing is set for tomorrow." Jaden barely heard her. His mind was racing. Malik stood up. "I'll be there," he said. Jaden frowned. "Where?" Malik's eyes stayed locked onto his. "In court," he said. "Because whether you believe it or not, kid, this ain't over." Then he turned and walked out, leaving Jaden alone with a pit in his stomach. The next morning, Jaden sat in the back of a police van, his hands cuffed in front of him. The ride to the courthouse was silent except for the hum of the engine. His mind was a mess. He didn't know what to expect. The judge had already warned him before. This was his last chance. 5 felonies at 17? They were ready to throw him away. When they arrived, officers led him inside. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, family members, even a few kids from his neighborhood sat watching. And then he saw him, Malik, sitting in the front row, arms crossed, watching. Jaden's stomach twisted. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The hearing began. The prosecutor spoke first, listing every charge against him. Armed robbery, assault, possession of a stolen weapon. The words hit like punches, one after the other. Jaden tried to stay cool, but sweat prickled his neck. Then, the judge turned to him. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Jaden hesitated. His throat felt tight. Then, Malik stood up. Your Honor, if I may? His voice was deep, commanding. The judge studied him for a moment, then nodded. Malik stepped forward. He looked at Jaden, then at the judge. I know this kid, he said. I know him because I was him. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Jaden's chest tightened. I spent 25 years behind bars, Malik continued. Wasted my youth, lost my family, buried my friends. I thought I was untouchable, just like he does. He turned to Jaden, his eyes hard. And let me tell you something, kid. That cell, that life, it doesn't make you tough. It breaks you. Jaden felt frozen in place. You think you're about that life? Malik's voice rose. You ain't seen nothing yet. You ever seen a man get shanked for a pack of noodles? Ever been locked in a hole so long you forget what sunlight feels like? Ever wake up and realize you'll never hold your own kid because the streets tricked you into thinking they loved you? Jaden's hands shook. You think prison makes you a man? Malik scoffed. Let me tell you what prison does. It makes you disappear. You become a number. A ghost. Silence swallowed the room. Then Malik did something unexpected. He stepped closer, and his voice softened. But it ain't too late for you. Jaden's breath caught. You still got a choice, Malik said. Right now. Right here. For the first time in a long time, Jaden felt something unfamiliar. Hope. The judge tapped his gavel. I'll be making my decision shortly. Jaden's heart pounded. And as Malik walked back to his seat, he turned to Jaden one last time and said something that shook him to his core. Something that would change his life forever. Jaden inhaled sharply, because in that moment, everything hung in the balance, and he had no idea what was coming next. The courtroom was dead silent. Jaden's pulse pounded in his ears as Malik turned to him, his expression unreadable. His next words, spoken just above a whisper, sent a shiver through Jaden's spine. If you walk out of here the same way you walked in, you're already dead. The words hit Jaden like a punch to the gut. He wasn't expecting that. Not from Malik. Not here. But the way he said it, so certain, so final, made Jaden feel like he was standing at the edge of something deep, something dangerous. The judge exhaled sharply, flipping through the thick file of Jaden's charges. Mr. Carter, based on your record, the state is pushing for a lengthy sentence. However, given your age and the intervention request submitted this morning, I will consider alternative sentencing before I make my final decision. Alternative sentencing? Jaden frowned, confused. He glanced at Malik, but the man's face gave nothing away. The judge continued, I have received testimony from a former convict who has turned his life around and now works in youth intervention programs. Mr. Malik Thompson. Jaden's stomach flipped. That was not what he expected. This court acknowledges that some young offenders are victims of their environment, not just their choices, the judge went on. But at the same time, the law does not reward repeated criminal behavior. Jaden held his breath. The judge leaned forward. So here's my offer, Mr. Carter. You can serve 7 years in a juvenile correctional facility until you're transferred to adult prison at 24. Or you can enter an intensive rehabilitation program under the supervision of Mr. Thompson. Jaden's head snapped up. Did he hear that right? His mouth went dry. You mean with him? He nodded toward Malik. The judge nodded. Yes. 6 months in a controlled program, under strict supervision, followed by 2 years of monitored reintegration. That is the only alternative to incarceration. If you violate any terms, even once, you will be locked away for the full sentence. Jaden's mind raced. 6 months? With this guy? Jaden wasn't sure what scared him more, the thought of prison or the idea of being stuck with Malik. I need your answer, Mr. Carter, the judge said, his voice sharp. Jaden's fingers twitched against his cuffs. He looked at Malik again, searching his face for some kind of clue, some kind of reason why this stranger would even care. Malik just stared back, waiting. Jaden clenched his jaw. He could take the prison sentence, ride it out, prove that nothing scared him. Or he could step into something completely unknown, something that felt even more dangerous. Himself. He exhaled. Fine, he muttered. I'll do the program. The judge nodded, hammering the gavel. Then it settled. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Jaden barely heard them. His chest felt tight. His brain was still trying to process what just happened. A cop came over and unlocked his cuffs. Jaden rubbed his wrists, but his skin still felt trapped. Malik stood. "Let's go." Jaden hesitated. Then, slowly, he stood and followed Malik out of the courtroom. The ride was silent. Malik drove a beat-up old truck, the inside smelling faintly of coffee and leather. Jaden sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out the window. "So," Malik finally said, breaking the silence, "you really that stupid?" Jaden scowled. "What?" I said. "Are you really that stupid?" Malik repeated, eyes still on the road. "You thought you were untouchable? Thought you had it all figured out?" Jaden clenched his fists. "Man, I don't need a lecture." Malik snorted. "Yeah? What do you need then?" Jaden didn't answer. Malik tapped the steering wheel. "You got 5 felonies. 17 years old. That means you're one mistake away from a life sentence. And I don't mean 10, 15 years. I mean life." Jaden ground his teeth together. "I said I don't need a lecture." Malik turned to him for the first time. His dark eyes burned into Jaden's. "This ain't a lecture, kid," he said. "It's a warning." Jaden looked away. He didn't want to admit it, but for the first time in his life, he was scared. Malik's program wasn't what Jaden expected. He thought he'd be sent to some boring rehab facility with therapists asking him about his feelings. He was wrong. Malik took him to a small, run-down boxing gym on the south side of the city. The place smelled like sweat and old leather. Jaden wrinkled his nose. "This some kind of boot camp?" Malik smirked. "Something like that." Jaden looked around. A few guys were already in the ring, sparring. Others worked the heavy bags. The sounds of grunts and gloves smacking against leather filled the air. "First rule," Malik said, stepping in front of him. "You show up here every morning at 5 a.m. No excuses." Jaden snorted. "Yeah, okay." Malik stepped closer. "Second rule, you work. No running. No slacking. No complaining." Jaden crossed his arms. "And what happens if I don't?" Malik smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Then I take you right back to that courthouse and let the judge change his mind." Jaden's smirk faded. Malik turned and pointed to an old punching bag in the corner. "Start there. 100 punches. Each hand." Jaden scoffed. "That's it." Malik's smile widened. "Oh, you'll see." Jaden rolled his eyes and walked over to the bag. He cracked his knuckles, then threw a lazy punch. The bag barely moved. Malik chuckled. "That's cute. Try again." Jaden frowned, tightening his fist. He swung harder. "Still weak." Malik sighed. "Yeah, you got a long way to go, kid." Jaden's jaw clenched. He wasn't about to be humiliated. With a deep breath, he pulled back his arm and swung. His knuckles cracked against the leather, and a sharp pain shot up his wrist. Jaden sucked in a breath, shaking out his hand. "Damn." Malik just stood there, arms crossed. "You throw punches like you live your life, kid." Jaden glared at him. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Malik's smirk disappeared. All over the place. No control. No purpose. Jaden's face burned. "Now shut up and keep punching," Malik said. Jaden's hands ached. His arms burned, but he kept going. Because for the first time in his life, someone wasn't scared of him. Someone wasn't trying to use him. Someone was making him face himself. And that was scarier than anything he'd ever known. The next morning, Jaden woke up feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. His arms were sore. His knuckles throbbed. He groaned, rolling onto his side, about to go back to sleep. Bang, bang, bang. His door slammed open. Malik stood there. "Get up," he said. Jaden groaned. "Man, it's still dark outside." Malik smirked. "Yeah, and?" Jaden pulled the blanket over his head. "Big mistake." Malik ripped it away. "I said, get up." Jaden cursed under his breath, dragging himself out of bed. This was gonna be hell. And the worst part? It was just beginning. Jaden sat on the edge of the bed, his muscles screaming from the previous day's training. He hadn't expected Malik to be this serious about the program. He thought it would be some fake mentorship thing. Maybe a few meetings a week, a couple of easy tasks, and then he'd be free. But no, Malik was on him hard. "Clock's ticking, kid," Malik said, leaning against the doorframe. You got exactly 5 minutes to get dressed and be outside. Jaden gritted his teeth. Or what? Malik raised an eyebrow. You want to find out? Jaden knew that tone. He had heard it before from his old crew leaders, from cops, from men who weren't bluffing. Sighing, he stood up and grabbed his sweats. His whole body ached, but he wasn't about to let Malik see him struggle. 10 minutes later, he was outside in the early morning darkness. The air was cold, his breath visible in the dim streetlights. Malik was waiting. All right, Malik said, tossing Jaden a water bottle. Let's run. Jaden frowned. Run? Yeah, Malik said, already jogging ahead. What, you thought this was just about boxing? Jaden groaned but followed. His legs felt like bricks, but he forced himself forward. The first few minutes weren't so bad. Then his lungs started to burn. Malik stayed ahead, his pace steady. You think you're tough, huh? He called over his shoulder. Let's see if you can keep up. Jaden hated being challenged. He gritted his teeth and pushed harder, forcing his legs to move faster. But Malik wasn't slowing down. 10 minutes in, Jaden felt like his chest was on fire. He had run from cops before, but never like this. Never for this long. His body screamed at him to stop, but Malik kept running. So Jaden did too. By the time they reached the gym, Jaden collapsed onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. Sweat dripped down his face. Malik, barely winded, crouched beside him. Look at you, he said. You act tough, but you got no discipline. No control. Jaden glared at him, still catching his breath. Man, shut up. Malik chuckled. Nah, you need to hear this. He stood up, looking down at Jaden. That's your problem, kid. You think strength comes from being reckless, from acting like you don't care. But real strength? He tapped his temple. It starts here. Jaden stared at the ground, his fists clenched. He hated how much Malik was getting under his skin. But worse, he hated that he wasn't wrong. The next few weeks were brutal. Every morning, Jaden was up before sunrise. Running, training, getting punched in the ribs more times than he could count. Malik didn't let up. He pushed Jaden harder than anyone ever had. Harder than Jaden thought was even possible. And for the first time in his life, Jaden felt something he had never felt before. Structure. It was exhausting. It was frustrating. But deep down, a part of him knew this was changing him. But then, the test came, and it nearly destroyed everything. One night, after an especially brutal training session, Jaden was walking back to his room when he heard a familiar voice in the alley behind the gym. Yo, Jaden. He froze. Trey. His old crew. Jaden turned slowly. Trey stood there, hoodie up, hands in his pockets, a smirk on his face. 2 other guys flanked him. Jaden's heart pounded. He hadn't seen them since the robbery. What you doing here? Jaden asked, his voice wary. Trey chuckled. Man, that's what we want to ask you. Jaden didn't answer. Trey took a step closer. Look at you. Out here playing boxer with some old dude like that's gonna change anything. Jaden clenched his fists. I ain't playing nothing. Trey smirked. Nah? So what, you better than us now? Jaden swallowed hard. He knew how this worked. This was a test. He had seen it happen to other guys before. If he backed down, he'd look weak. If he stood his ground, it could turn ugly. Trey's eyes darkened. I got a job, Jay. A real one. Easy money. Just like old times. Jaden's stomach tightened. This was it. The crossroads. Everything Malik had been telling him, the choice between his past and his future, was right in front of him. And his next words would decide everything. Before Jaden could answer, a deep voice cut through the alley. Go home. Jaden turned. Malik stood there, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Trey and his crew tensed. Man, who the hell is this? Trey scoffed. Malik stepped forward, his eyes locked on Trey's. Somebody who's seen more than you ever will. His voice was low, controlled. Now I'll say it again. Go home. Trey scoffed, glancing at Jaden. This your new daddy or something? Jaden didn't respond. Malik didn't blink. A long silence stretched between them. Then Trey chuckled, shaking his head. You changed, Jay. Jaden swallowed hard. Trey's smirk faded. And that's a damn shame. With that, He turned and walked away, his boys following. Jaden let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Malik stared after them for a moment, then turned to Jaden. "You okay?" Jaden hesitated, then nodded. Malik studied him. "They'll be back." Jaden exhaled. "I know." Malik nodded. "Next time? Make sure you know what side you're really on." Jaden didn't respond, because deep down, he wasn't sure if he did. Jaden lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. Trey's words echoed in his head. "You changed, Jay. And that's a damn shame." Had he changed? And if he had, was that really a bad thing? He didn't know. What he did know was that Trey wouldn't let this go. The streets didn't like it when someone left. The streets didn't forgive. He exhaled sharply, turning over in bed. Malik was right. Trey would be back. And next time, it wouldn't be just words. Morning came fast. Too fast. Jaden's body still ached from the day before, but Malik didn't care. "Get up," Malik called from outside his room. "We got work to do." Jaden groaned, sitting up. "Man, I barely got any sleep." Malik smirked. "Then move faster. You're already behind." Jaden sighed but got up anyway. It wasn't like he had a choice. The gym was cold that morning. The usual smell of sweat and leather lingered, but there was something else in the air too. Tension. Jaden could feel Malik watching him closely, like he was waiting for him to break. After warm-ups, Malik tossed Jaden a pair of gloves. "Sparring day." Jaden raised an eyebrow. "With who?" Malik smirked. And then, from the other side of the gym, a guy stepped into the ring. Tall, muscular, covered in tattoos. Jaden's stomach tightened. Rico, one of Malik's old guys. Jaden had seen him around before, but had never spoken to him. Malik clapped Jaden on the back. "Rico's been boxing for 10 years. He's got speed, power, and technique." Malik turned to Rico. "Show him what that means." Rico smirked, cracking his knuckles. "With pleasure." Jaden swallowed. This was gonna hurt. The first punch came faster than Jaden expected. A blur of movement, then pain exploded in his ribs. Jaden stumbled back, gasping. Rico didn't wait. He moved in fast, sending another shot to Jaden's stomach. Jaden doubled over. Malik's voice rang out. "Hands up, kid." Jaden gritted his teeth, lifting his gloves just in time to block a jab. Rico laughed. "You slow, little man." Jaden swung wildly. Missed. Rico countered. Hard. Jaden hit the mat. The world spun for a second. He groaned, tasting blood. Malik stood over him. "Get up." Jaden blinked up at him. "Man, Get up." Jaden clenched his jaw, pushed himself to his feet. Rico grinned. "You want more?" Jaden exhaled, then nodded. Rico raised an eyebrow. "All right then." The second round started. And this time, Jaden didn't just take hits. He fought back. By the end of the session, Jaden was bruised, exhausted, and barely standing. But something had changed. Malik saw it. "You didn't quit," he said as Jaden sat on the bench, wiping sweat from his face. Jaden scoffed. "Didn't feel like much of a win." Malik chuckled. "It ain't about winning. It's about standing up when you get knocked down." Jaden sighed, leaning back against the wall. His ribs throbbed. His knuckles were raw. But for some reason, he felt good. Stronger. Like he had survived something. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand what Malik was trying to teach him. But then, the door to the gym swung open. Jaden looked up, and his blood went cold. Trey. Again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. 3 guys stood behind him, and one of them had a gun. The gym fell silent. Malik tensed. Jaden could see it in the way his shoulders squared, the way his jaw clenched. Trey smirked. "Told you we'd be back." Jaden swallowed hard. "What do you want, Trey?" Trey's smirk faded. "I want you to remember who you are." Jaden stayed silent. Trey took a step forward. "You think this little boxing thing is going to change something? You think this old dude is going to save you?" Jaden didn't answer. Trey's eyes darkened. "You owe me, Jay." Jaden's fists clenched. "I don't owe you nothing." Trey laughed. "That's funny. 'Cause last time I checked, you ran when things got hot. Left me to deal with it." Jaden's stomach twisted. Trey's voice dropped lower. That ain't how it works, bro. One of Trey's guys shifted. The one with the gun. Jaden's breath caught. Malik noticed too. Slowly, he stepped between Jaden and Trey. Whatever you came for, Malik said. His voice calm, steady. It ain't happening here. Trey tilted his head. That right? Malik nodded. That's right. Trey's jaw tightened. You think I won't do it? Malik didn't blink. You might, Malik said. But then what? The gym was dead silent. Malik took a step forward. You kill a kid like Jay? That ain't making you a man. That's making you weak. Trey's grip on his hoodie tightened. Malik didn't stop. You know how many kids I've seen pull that trigger, thinking it makes them powerful? Malik's voice was low. Dangerous. You know where they end up? Trey didn't answer. Malik leaned in. Dead. Jaden's heart pounded. Trey's fingers twitched. For a moment, Jaden thought it was over. Then Trey exhaled, stepped back, shook his head. You soft now, Jay. His voice was cold. Guess that's how it is. Then, just like that, he turned, walked out. The others followed. And the second they were gone, Jaden let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Malik turned to him. You still think this ain't life or death? Jaden didn't answer. Because now, he knew the truth. And it scared him more than anything ever had. Jaden sat on the edge of the boxing ring, staring at the door Trey had just walked out of. His heart was still hammering, his palms slick with sweat. Malik hadn't moved. He stood there, arms crossed, watching Jaden, studying him. You get it now? Malik finally asked. Jaden swallowed hard. Yeah. Malik shook his head. No, you think you get it. But you don't. Jaden looked up, confused. What are you talking about? Trey literally just pulled up on me with a guy carrying a gun. I get it. Malik took a step forward, his voice low, controlled. You don't get it, kid. Because if you did, you wouldn't still be sitting here trying to decide. Jaden's stomach twisted. You think Trey's done? Malik asked. You think he's just gonna walk away? Jaden didn't answer. Malik nodded. Yeah, that's what I thought. The gym was silent for a long time. Then Malik grabbed a pair of gloves and tossed them at Jaden. Up. Jaden frowned. What? Malik's voice was sharp. Get up. Jaden hesitated, but slid off the ring and strapped the gloves on. Malik stepped into the ring and gestured for Jaden to join him. Jaden's stomach dropped. He had sparred with Rico before. He had even taken a few hits from other guys in the gym. But Malik? Malik was a different beast. You want to survive out there? Malik said, tightening his gloves. Then let's see if you can survive in here first. Jaden exhaled, climbing into the ring. This was gonna hurt. The first punch came fast. Jaden barely had time to react before Malik's fist connected with his ribs. Pain shot through his side, but before he could process it, Malik hit him again. A quick jab to the jaw. Not full force, but enough to send a message. Jaden stumbled back, blinking. Hands up, Malik said. Jaden gritted his teeth and lifted his gloves. Malik circled him. You scared? Jaden frowned. No. Malik nodded, then moved. Fast. A right hook. Jaden dodged, barely. A left jab. Jaden blocked. Then Malik hit him with a body shot so fast and precise that Jaden felt his lungs collapse for a second. He doubled over, gasping. Malik stepped back. That's fear. Jaden sucked in a sharp breath. I said I ain't scared. Malik's eyes burned into him. Then why do you still flinch? Jaden wiped his mouth. Man, whatever. You're way bigger than me. Malik chuckled. Oh, is that the problem? Jaden scowled. I'm just saying. It ain't fair. Malik shook his head. You think Trey's gonna fight fair? You think the streets come with a rulebook? Jaden didn't answer. Malik took a step closer. You think that gun was fair? Jaden's jaw clenched. You want out, kid? Malik asked. You really want out? Then stop waiting for a fair fight. Jaden exhaled sharply. Malik pointed at him. Your problem is you keep reacting. You gotta move first. You gotta control the fight before it starts. Jaden's heart pounded. Malik lowered his gloves. You ready to stop being a punching bag? Jaden hesitated, then nodded. Malik smiled, and then he came at him. The next hour was brutal. Jaden got hit more times than he could count, but he also started moving faster, dodging smarter, hitting back. Malik didn't go easy on him. He forced Jaden to think, to react before the hit came. And for the first time, Jaden felt like he had control. By the end of the session, he was dripping with sweat, bruised, but still standing. Malik smirked. Now that's progress. Jaden didn't smile back. He was too tired. Malik clapped him on the shoulder. Go clean up. We're done for today. Jaden nodded and climbed out of the ring. His body ached, but deep down, he felt different, stronger, more prepared. Then his phone buzzed. Jaden pulled it out of his pocket, glancing at the screen. No name, just a number. A text. See you soon. Jaden's breath caught. Trey. Jaden didn't tell Malik about the text. Maybe he should have. But something in him said he needed to handle this on his own. That night, he lay awake again, replaying everything over and over in his head. Malik was right. Trey wasn't done. And the next time he came, it wouldn't just be a warning. Jaden knew what had to be done. He couldn't keep running. He had to face Trey. But how? His fists clenched. He didn't have the answer yet. But one thing was clear. The fight wasn't over. And this time, he wouldn't be the one on the ground. Jaden stood in front of the gym mirror, staring at his reflection. His knuckles were bruised. His ribs ached. His body felt like it had been through a war. But the thing that had changed the most? His eyes. They weren't the same. The old Jaden, the one who thought he was invincible, who ran the streets without a second thought, was fading. The new Jaden? He was still figuring that out. The phone in his pocket felt like a weight. Trey's message was burned into his mind. See you soon. Jaden clenched his fists. He couldn't ignore it. Trey wasn't the type to let things go. And that meant one thing. It was time. The morning air was cold, but Jaden barely felt it as he jogged beside Malik. It had been a full month since he started training. A full month since the last time he had seen Trey. Malik didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He knew something was weighing on Jaden, but he waited. Jaden wasn't sure why, but that made it worse. Finally, as they reached the halfway mark of their run, Jaden spoke. Trey texted me. Malik didn't slow down, didn't react, just kept running. Jaden gritted his teeth. You hear me? I heard you. Jaden exhaled sharply. And Malik finally stopped, turning to face him. His breath came steady, like the run hadn't even touched him. You tell me, kid. Jaden frowned. Tell you what? What you gonna do about it? Jaden's chest tightened. That was the question, wasn't it? He could feel Trey pulling him back, the streets calling his name. And deep down, a part of him wanted to answer. Because Trey wasn't just a guy from his past. He was a brother, a reminder of who Jaden used to be. And maybe, just maybe, a reminder of who he still was. Jaden looked away. I don't know. Malik studied him. Yeah, you do. Jaden clenched his jaw. Man, why do you always do that? Do what? Act like you know me better than I know myself. Malik chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Because I do. Jaden frowned. How? Malik exhaled. Because, kid, I was you. Silence. Then Malik spoke again, his voice quieter. You think I don't know what it's like? Having one foot in, one foot out? Thinking you can change, but the past keeps knocking at your door? Jaden swallowed hard. Malik nodded. Yeah, I know exactly what you're feeling right now. Jaden hesitated. What did you do? Malik's face darkened. Wrong answer, he said. Jaden stared at him. Malik turned away. Come on. We got work to do. Jaden was restless the entire day. By the time the gym closed, he had made up his mind. He was going to see Trey. Not to go back. Not to prove anything. But to end it. For good. He grabbed his hoodie, pulled it over his head, and slipped out of the gym before Malik could stop him. The streets felt different. Quieter. Or maybe he was different. The spot was the same as always. An abandoned lot behind an old liquor store, tucked away from the streetlights. Jaden's stomach tightened as he stepped onto the cracked pavement. Trey was already there, and he wasn't alone. There were 4 of them. Trey stood in the middle, arms crossed, hood up. The others? Jaden didn't recognize them, but he knew their type. hard eyes, hands in their pockets, the kind of stance that meant one thing. They were strapped. Jaden exhaled. No turning back now. Trey smirked. Look who finally decided to show up. Jaden didn't respond. Trey nodded toward him. So what's the deal, Jay? You too good for us now? Jaden clenched his fists. It ain't like that. Trey scoffed. Nah, it is. He stepped closer. You forgot where you came from. Jaden shook his head. I ain't forget nothing. Trey's smirk faded. Then prove it. Jaden frowned. Prove what? One of the guys behind Trey pulled something from his pocket. Jaden's heart nearly stopped. A gun. Trey's voice was calm. We got a job tonight. One last score. You in or you out? Jaden's stomach twisted. This was it. The moment. The final test. He could feel Malik's voice in his head. Make sure you know what side you're really on. Jaden exhaled, then shook his head. I'm out. Silence. Trey's expression didn't change. You sure about that? Jaden nodded. Yeah. Trey didn't blink. Then, slowly, he smiled. You know what happens now, right? Jaden didn't answer. Trey's smile widened. You ain't one of us no more. Jaden swallowed hard. I know. Trey nodded. Then you better watch your back, Jay. Jaden held his ground. I've been watching. Trey stared at him for a long time. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. The others followed. Jaden let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. It was over. For now. Jaden walked back to the gym in silence. His hands were shaking. His heart was still pounding. But he had done it. He had chosen. And for the first time in his life, he felt free. But as soon as he walked into the gym, Malik was waiting, sitting in the ring, arms crossed. Watching him, Jaden sighed. You knew, huh? Malik nodded. Yup. Jaden rubbed his face. You mad? Malik shrugged. Nope. Jaden frowned. Why not? Malik smirked. Because you passed. Jaden blinked. Malik stood up. Now get some rest, kid. The real work starts tomorrow. Jaden exhaled. He had no idea what that meant. But for the first time, he was ready to find out. Jaden lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed everything. Trey's smirk, the weight of the gun in his hand, the way the night had swallowed them as they disappeared down the alley. He had done it. He had walked away. But was it really over? Deep down, he knew the truth. Trey wasn't the type to just let things slide. And sooner or later, he was coming back. The next morning, Jaden could barely move. His body ached from training, his head from thinking. But Malik wasn't about to give him a day off. Up. Jaden groaned, rolling over. Bro, come on. Malik didn't budge. Not asking. Jaden exhaled sharply, dragging himself out of bed. By the time they got to the gym, Jaden could tell something was different. Malik wasn't talking much. He was focused, locked in. Jaden frowned. What's up with you? Malik glanced at him. You really think it's over? Jaden hesitated. Malik cut him off. Nah, you don't. Jaden exhaled. I walked away. Malik nodded. Good. Then he tilted his head. But did they? Jaden's stomach twisted. That was the real question, wasn't it? Walking away was one thing. Staying away? That was a whole different fight. Malik leaned against the ring. You know why guys like Trey don't just let things go? Jaden shook his head. Malik's eyes darkened. Because they need you to believe there's no other way. Jaden stayed quiet. Malik crossed his arms. You took a step. But that's all it is, one step. And the streets? They're gonna try and pull you right back. Jaden clenched his fists. So what do I do? Malik's lips curled into a smirk. You get ready. Jaden frowned. For what? Malik stepped forward. For war. The training got harder. Malik pushed Jaden like never before. It wasn't just about boxing anymore. It was about discipline, control. Jaden wasn't just learning how to fight. He was learning when to fight. And more importantly, when not to. Malik drilled it into him every day. Your biggest weapon ain't your fists. Malik pointed at his head. It's this. The second you let emotion control you, you already lost. Jaden exhaled. So what? I'm just supposed to let people run over me. Malik's eyes flashed. Nah, you supposed to make sure they never even get the chance. Jaden frowned. How? Malik smirked. By being so strong they don't even try. Weeks passed. Jaden's body changed. His mindset shifted. He was faster, stronger, sharper. But then, the past came knocking. And this time, it didn't ask permission. It happened fast. Jaden was walking back from the store, bag in hand, minding his business. Then, a car pulled up. The windows rolled down. And there he was. Trey. Jaden's stomach turned to ice. Trey smirked. Told you we'd see you soon. Jaden stayed still. His heart pounded, but his face stayed blank. Control. Trey tilted his head. You really thought it was that easy, huh? Jaden exhaled slowly. I told you. I'm out. Trey's smirk didn't fade. Then he glanced at the guy in the passenger seat. And Jaden saw it. The gun. His breath caught. Trey leaned out the window. You sure about that? Jaden didn't move. Didn't react. Then, Trey's smirk vanished. You turned your back on family, Jay. His voice was quiet, but deadly. Jaden's jaw clenched. That was your choice, Trey continued. Now it's mine. Jaden's stomach twisted. Trey gave him one last look. Then, the tires screeched. The car sped off. Jaden stood there, his hands clenched into fists. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Jaden stormed into the gym, tossing his bag to the floor. Malik looked up. What happened? Jaden didn't answer. Malik sighed. Trey. Jaden nodded. Malik exhaled. What did he say? Jaden's jaw tightened. He made a choice. Malik studied him. And what's yours? Jaden's fists trembled. I don't know. Malik nodded slowly. Then he walked over. You want my advice? Jaden met his gaze. Yeah. Malik's voice was calm. Don't play their game. Jaden frowned. What? Malik's eyes darkened. You let them set the rules. You already lost. Jaden exhaled. Then what do I do? Malik leaned in. You changed the game. Jaden stared at him. Then, slowly, he nodded. Because for the first time, he wasn't just reacting. He was planning. And this time, he wasn't waiting for Trey to make a move. He was making his own. Before it was too late, Jaden sat in the back of the gym, wrapping his hands slowly. His mind was racing, but his face was calm. He kept hearing Malik's words over and over in his head. You changed the game. Easier said than done. Trey wasn't just a problem. He was a storm waiting to hit. And Jaden knew once it did, there was no walking away without damage. He had a choice. Wait for Trey to come for him, or move first. But if he moved first, it couldn't be the way Trey expected. Jaden exhaled sharply and stood up. Malik. The older man looked up from his spot near the ring. Jaden's voice was steady. I'm ready. Malik studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good, he said. Now let's make sure you don't get yourself killed. For the next week, Malik drilled Jaden harder than ever. Not just physically, mentally. Every fight is won before it starts, Malik told him. You walk into a situation unprepared, you already lost. Jaden nodded, sweat dripping down his forehead. So what do I do? Malik smirked. You learn how to control it. Jaden frowned. Control what? Malik leaned in. The room. Jaden sat on the gym floor, exhausted. His knuckles were bruised, his ribs sore. Malik had made him spar with 3 different guys back to back, each one stronger than the last. Jaden had survived. Barely. Malik crouched beside him. What did you learn? Jaden wiped his face with his shirt. That I still got work to do. Malik chuckled. Yeah, but you learned something else too. Jaden frowned. What? Malik's voice dropped lower. You learned how to take a hit and keep moving. Jaden exhaled. Yeah. Malik nodded. Good. Because now, it's time for the real fight. Jaden made his move that night. Not with fists. Not with threats. With something Trey didn't expect. Control. Jaden knew where Trey and his guys would be. Same spot as always. The abandoned lot behind the liquor store. But this time, Jaden wasn't coming as the old Jaden. He was coming as someone new. Someone in control. The night air was thick with tension. Jaden walked into the lot alone. Trey was already there, leaning against a car. Two guys flanked him, both with their hands in their pockets. Jaden's stomach tightened, but he didn't stop walking. Trey smirked. Look who finally grew some balls. Jaden didn't react, didn't smile, just kept walking until he was a few feet away. Then he stopped. Trey eyed him. You got something to say? Or you just here to waste my time? Jaden exhaled. This ends now. Trey's smirk vanished. That right? Jaden nodded. Yeah. Trey chuckled, shaking his head. You think, 'cause you've been playing boxer with that old dude, you different now? That you better than us? Jaden didn't blink. No. Trey tilted his head. Then what? Jaden inhaled deeply. I'm just not scared anymore. Silence. Trey's expression darkened. You sure about that? Jaden nodded. Yeah. Trey stared at him for a long moment. Then, he stepped forward. And in that instant, Jaden knew. This was it. The final test. And there was no turning back. Jaden stood his ground. Trey stopped inches away, his voice low. You think you can just walk away? Jaden exhaled. I already did. Trey's jaw clenched. Then, he pulled something from his hoodie. Jaden's breath caught. A gun. Jaden's pulse pounded, but he kept his face still. Control. Trey held the gun loosely, almost casually. You really ain't scared? Jaden swallowed. Then, slowly, he shook his head. Trey's grip tightened. You must think I'm playing. Jaden exhaled. No, I think you're trapped. Trey's eyes flashed. What? Jaden took a step forward. You don't want to do this, Trey. Trey scoffed. Oh yeah. Jaden nodded. Yeah, because deep down, you know what happens if you pull that trigger. Trey's fingers twitched on the gun. Jaden's voice stayed calm. You think the streets got your back? Think they're gonna care if you go down for this? Trey's jaw clenched. Jaden kept going. You know how this ends, bro. You shoot me, you run for a little while, but they will catch you. And then what? Trey's breathing was heavy now. Jaden took one last step forward. Then you're the one rotting in a cage. The lot was dead silent. Jaden could see it now. The conflict in Trey's eyes. The gun trembled slightly. And for the first time, Jaden realized something. Trey was scared. Not of Jaden. Of himself. Jaden exhaled. You got a choice, man. Trey swallowed hard. Then, his hand lowered. Jaden's breath came slow. Steady. Trey stared at him. Then shook his head. You different, Jay. Jaden nodded. Yeah, I am. Trey scoffed, stepping back. Guess that means you ain't one of us no more. Jaden exhaled. No, he said. I'm not. Trey studied him for a moment longer. Then, he turned. And just like that, he walked away. Jaden let out a slow breath. It was over. For real this time. And for the first time in his life, he had won a fight without throwing a single punch. Jaden walked back to the gym, his heart still racing. As soon as he stepped inside, Malik was waiting, sitting in the ring, arms crossed. Watching him, Jaden exhaled. You knew, didn't you? Malik smirked. Knew what? Jaden scoffed. That I was gonna handle it. Malik leaned back. I had a feeling. Jaden sat on the bench, rubbing his face. It's over. Malik nodded. Good. Jaden sighed. So what now? Malik's smirk widened. Now. He stood up. The real work begins. Jaden frowned. Man, I thought that was the work. Malik chuckled. No, kid. He clapped Jaden on the shoulder. That was just the beginning. Jaden exhaled. He had no idea what was coming next. But for the first time, he wasn't scared. Jaden woke up before the sun, his mind still replaying the night before. Trey was gone. The past, finally behind him. Or at least, that's what he hoped. He sat up, exhaling slowly. His body ached, but it wasn't the pain that kept him awake. It was the question. Now what? He had spent years surviving, running, fighting. But now, with Trey gone, with the streets behind him, what was he fighting for? The thought gnawed at him as he got dressed. He had never thought this far ahead. The streets had always told him who he was. But now, for the first time, he had to decide that for himself. And that was terrifying. When Jaden got to the gym, Malik was already there, hitting the heavy bag. His movements were sharp, controlled. The same way he fought. The same way he lived. Jaden watched for a moment before walking over. You don't sleep, huh? Malik smirked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Sleep is for people who ain't got work to do. Jaden chuckled. Guess that means I'm never sleeping again. Malik tossed him a pair of gloves. Good. 'Cause we ain't done yet. Jaden frowned. Man, I already handled Trey. Malik's smirk faded. Handling Trey was one fight. He stepped closer. But the battle ain't over. Jaden sighed, tightening his gloves. Then what's next? Malik studied him. That's up to you. Jaden frowned. What you mean? Malik tapped his temple. You spent your whole life running from something. Now you gotta start running toward something. Jaden exhaled. Yeah, but toward what? Malik nodded toward the ring. Get in. Let's figure it out. The next hour was brutal. Jaden had thought he was done with Malik's training, but the older man pushed him harder than ever. Every punch, every step, every breath felt like it mattered more now. It wasn't just about fighting anymore. It was about proving something. To himself. To Malik. To the world. By the time they finished, Jaden was drenched in sweat, his muscles screaming. But he felt alive. Malik handed him a water bottle. You learning? Jaden exhaled, nodding. Yeah. Malik smirked. Good. 'Cause the world don't care about what you've been through. The world only cares about what you do next. Jaden drank his water, processing Malik's words. What was next? And then, the door to the gym opened. Jaden looked up, and his stomach dropped. A police officer stepped inside. Not just any cop. Detective Hall. The same cop who had arrested Jaden the night of the robbery. The same one who had told him there wouldn't be another chance. Jaden's breath caught. His hands clenched. He wasn't in trouble. Not anymore. Right? Detective Hall scanned the gym before his eyes landed on Jaden. Then, he walked straight toward him. Jaden felt his chest tighten. This was it. Whatever was about to happen next. It wasn't gonna be good. Hall stopped in front of them, his face unreadable. Malik crossed his arms. Something we can do for you, detective? Hall ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Jaden. Carter, he said, his voice low. We need to talk. Jaden exhaled sharply. About what? Hall hesitated. Then he pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward Jaden. A picture. Jaden's stomach flipped. It was Trey, lying on the ground, blood pooling around him, unmoving. Jaden's vision blurred. No, he whispered. Hall's voice was firm. We found him 2 hours ago. Jaden's ears rang. His breath came fast. Malik put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. Hall's eyes were sharp. I need to know something, Carter. Jaden barely heard him. His mind was racing. Trey. Gone. No. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't. Hall's voice cut through his thoughts. Where were you last night? Jaden's stomach dropped. His throat went dry. He forced himself to speak. You think I... Hall didn't blink. I think you were the last person seen with him. Jaden's breath caught. No, he said. I didn't. Hall held up a hand. Then prove it. Jaden felt his world tilting. This couldn't be happening. Trey was gone. And now, whether he liked it or not, the past wasn't behind him. It had just caught up. Jaden's hands trembled. His pulse pounded in his ears. Trey was dead. The words barely made sense in his head. They had just talked. Just stood face to face. Trey had walked away. Jaden had seen him leave. And now, he was gone. Jaden swallowed, forcing himself to meet Detective Hall's stare. I didn't do this. His voice was raw, barely above a whisper. Hall didn't react. He just studied Jaden like he was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Malik's voice cut in. He was with me last night. Hall turned his gaze to Malik. The whole night? Malik didn't blink. Yeah. Jaden's stomach twisted. Malik was covering for him. And Hall knew it. The detective exhaled. I ain't here to slap cuffs on you, Carter. Not yet. He lowered his voice. But you better start talking. Because right now, you look guilty as hell. Jaden's jaw clenched. I told you. I didn't do it. Hall studied him for a long moment. Then, he slipped a small notepad from his pocket and scribbled something down. My number, he said, tearing out the page and holding it out. If you remember anything. Jaden hesitated before taking it. Hall nodded once. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Just before he left, he paused. I hope you're telling the truth, Carter. His voice was quiet. Dangerous. Because if I find out otherwise. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Then he was gone. The door swung shut. Silence. Jaden inhaled sharply, gripping the note so tightly it crumpled in his fist. Malik sighed. You good. Jaden laughed bitterly. My best friend just got killed, and a detective thinks I did it. You tell me. Malik didn't say anything. Jaden ran a hand over his face. His mind was racing. Trey was gone. Someone had killed him, and now the cops were looking at him. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jaden couldn't sit still. He had left the gym, walking the streets aimlessly. His brain kept replaying the last conversation he had with Trey. The way he had smirked. The way he had walked away. You turned your back on family, Jay. That was your choice. Now it's mine. Jaden swallowed. Trey knew something was coming. Maybe that was why he pulled up on Jaden in the first place. Maybe he was already in trouble. Jaden had to find out. And there was only one person who might have answers. Trey's little brother, Darnell. Darnell's house was quiet. Too quiet. Jaden stood outside for a long time before finally knocking. A few seconds passed. Then the door cracked open. Darnell's face appeared, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept. When he saw Jaden, his whole body tensed. What do you want? His voice was hoarse. Jaden hesitated. I need to talk. Darnell scoffed. Talk? You serious? Jaden clenched his fists. I didn't do this, D. Darnell stared at him. Then, slowly, he stepped outside and shut the door behind him. His voice was low. Then who did? Jaden exhaled. That's what I'm trying to find out. Darnell's jaw tightened. They say you were the last one to see him. Jaden nodded. Yeah, but he left. He walked away. Darnell's hands balled into fists. And you just let him? His voice cracked. You knew Trey had enemies. You knew he wasn't safe out here. Jaden swallowed hard. I didn't know, man. I swear. Darnell glared at him, breathing heavy. Then he looked away. After a long silence, he spoke. He was meeting someone last night. Jaden's heart skipped. Who? Darnell shook his head. I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. He exhaled. But I know it was bad. Jaden frowned. How? Darnell's voice was quiet. Because he told me. If he didn't come back, not to look for him. Jaden's stomach dropped. Trey knew something was coming. And he went anyway. Jaden exhaled sharply. Where was he going? Darnell hesitated. Then, the docks. Jaden felt his pulse quicken. The docks. A place nobody went unless they were handling something dirty. Jaden's mind raced. Trey met someone there. And it got him killed. Jaden clenched his jaw. There was only one way to get answers. He had to go there himself. The docks were nearly empty when Jaden arrived. The air smelled like salt and rust, the water black and still. Jaden pulled his hoodie tighter around himself, glancing around. Nothing. Just abandoned crates, old warehouses, and the distant hum of the city. Jaden's stomach twisted. This was a mistake. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Jaden spun. A figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, broad, and familiar. Jaden's blood turned to ice. Rico, one of Malik's old fighters. Jaden took a step back. What the hell are you doing here? Rico smirked. And that's when Jaden saw it. The gun in his hand. Jaden's breath caught. His stomach twisted. It was him. Rico was the one who killed Trey. And now, he was here for Jaden too. Rico stepped closer, the gun gleaming under the streetlight. Jaden's mind raced. He had no weapon, no backup, just his fists. Rico chuckled. You shouldn't have come here, kid. Jaden exhaled slowly. Control. Think. Then, Rico raised the gun. Jaden moved. Fast. He lunged, knocking Rico's arm up just as the gun went off. Bang. The shot echoed through the docks. Jaden didn't stop. He slammed his elbow into Rico's ribs, then threw a right hook. Rico staggered back, cursing. Jaden didn't hesitate. He tackled him. The gun clattered to the ground. Jaden scrambled for it, but Rico was faster. He grabbed Jaden, yanked him back, and slammed a fist into his stomach. Jaden gasped, stumbling. Rico reached for the gun. Jaden's heart pounded. This was it. Life or death. No more running. No more waiting. Jaden moved. His fist connected with Rico's jaw, hard. Rico grunted, stumbling. Jaden grabbed the gun, pointed it. Rico froze. For a long second, neither of them moved. Jaden's breath came fast. His hands shook. He could end it right now. Right here. One pull of the trigger. But then, Malik's voice echoed in his head. Your biggest weapon ain't your fists. It's this. Jaden exhaled. Slowly, he lowered the gun. Rico's eyes flickered with confusion. Then, the sound of sirens filled the air. Jaden turned. Police cars. Headlights cutting through the darkness. Detective Hall. Rico's face twisted. He turned to run, but cops swarmed in, guns drawn. Don't move. Rico froze. Jaden let out a breath. It was over. For real this time. The red and blue lights flickered off the dark water, sirens cutting through the night air. Jaden stood frozen, the weight of everything pressing down on him. It was over. Rico was on the ground, cuffed, a cop's knee digging into his back. His face was twisted with anger, but Jaden could see it. Fear. The same fear Trey had before he walked away. The same fear Jaden had felt his whole life. And now? He wasn't afraid anymore. Detective Hall stepped forward, his eyes sharp as he looked Jaden up and down. You all right, Carter? Jaden exhaled, his body still shaking with adrenaline. Yeah. Hall studied him for a long moment, then glanced at Rico. Guess you were telling the truth. Jaden didn't respond. He just stared at Rico, breathing hard. This could have been him. This should have been him. If Malik hadn't stepped in, if he hadn't walked away, if he had made one wrong choice. Hall turned to one of the officers. Take him in. They yanked Rico to his feet, shoving him toward a squad car. Rico didn't fight. He just glared at Jaden, his lip bleeding, his eyes filled with something dark. Regret. Jaden swallowed. Hall crossed his arms. So, you want to tell me how you ended up here? Jaden hesitated. Then he shook his head. Not really. Hall smirked. Didn't think so. The detective exhaled, rubbing his temple. Look, kid, you were this close to getting yourself killed tonight. And let's be real. You're lucky we showed up when we did. Jaden stayed silent. Hall sighed. You need to be careful. People like him? They don't just let things go. Jaden clenched his fists. I know. Hall nodded. Good. Then his eyes softened. Just a little. You did the right thing. Jaden exhaled. Yeah. He glanced at Rico. But it doesn't feel like it. Hall patted his shoulder once. Give it time. Then he turned and walked toward his car. Jaden stood there, staring at the water, the sound of sirens fading into the distance. It really was over. For the first time in his life. He wasn't running from something. He was walking toward something. But what? The gym was quiet when Jaden got back. It was late. Malik was sitting in the ring, taping his hands, like he already knew what had happened. Jaden stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. Malik didn't look up. You good? Jaden swallowed, then nodded. Yeah. Malik tied off his tape, finally meeting Jaden's gaze. So? He asked. What now? Jaden hesitated. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. He had spent so long trying to survive, trying to stay ahead of the streets, of Trey, of himself. Now he had a chance to build something, to be something more. The idea scared him, but it also felt good. Jaden inhaled. I want to fight, he said. Malik raised an eyebrow. You been fighting? Jaden shook his head. Not like that. He stepped forward. I want to do it for real. In the ring. Malik studied him for a long moment. Then, a slow smirk. All right, kid. He stood up. Then let's get to work. The next few months were different. Hard. But not in the way Jaden was used to. No more running. No more looking over his shoulder. Now, every morning, he was in the gym. Training. Pushing himself. Not for survival, but for something bigger. Malik didn't take it easy on him. He never did. But Jaden didn't want it easy. He wanted real. The bruises, the sweat, the exhaustion. It was the only thing that ever felt honest. And one day, Malik handed him something. A small, folded piece of paper. Jaden frowned, opening it. Then his breath caught. A fight card. His name on the list. Jaden looked up, his heart pounding. You serious? Malik nodded. You're ready. Jaden exhaled sharply. This was it. His first real fight. Not on the streets. Not for survival. For himself. Jaden clenched the paper in his hands, feeling something unfamiliar. Pride. He wasn't the same kid who walked into this gym months ago. He wasn't the same kid who thought the streets were all there was. He had changed. And this time, he wasn't looking back. The night of the fight came fast. Jaden stood in the locker room, wrapping his hands. His stomach was tight, his nerves creeping in. Malik leaned against the wall. You ready? Jaden nodded. Yeah. Malik smirked. Good. Then he grabbed Jaden's shoulder, his voice quieter. No matter what happens in that ring, you already won. Jaden met his gaze. Then he nodded, because for the first time in his life, he believed it. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. Fighters to the ring. Jaden exhaled, stepped forward, and walked into his future.